So years ago, a public tech company hired me to write emails at what works out to about $2,000 an hour. And it was not because I'm the best writer that they've ever seen, but instead it's because of something far more important, which is how I talked about the writing. And once you see the proposal, which I'll share here, and how it was framed, it changes how you think about earning more no matter what it is you do in your career. To me, the most important part of this proposal is that it is more than just a business proposal. It's a way of thinking about and framing value and persuading people in literally every element of your life. It's how all effective communication is structured. The CFO of this company, the company's called User Testing, called this the best proposal he'd ever seen. That's in 20 years of being an executive in technology companies, because of how I framed value. So before I show you the proposal, I need to start by setting the foundations, right? Because the realization that I had early on in my career governs everything I've been able to do since. The universal law of agreement. If you're new here, my name is Brendan Dell. I'm an advisor to top tech companies, and I'm now working to help professionals build leverage into their lives. Here is the mistake that I see most people make. People think that persuasion is about convincing people of something, but it isn't. You cannot persuade anyone as an employee, a consultant, in a relationship, or anything else of anything unless you start from understanding. Agreement always precedes persuasion. The three elements of effective persuasion. So every meaningful decision, whether it's asking for resources at work or pitching a consulting project or trying to get a spouse to do something, follows the same intrinsic sequence. First, you have to agree on the problem. Then you have to agree on the solution. And then, and only then, does any discussion of cost or effort or trade-off make sense. What you'll find is that when people argue with you about price or effort or fairness or whatever, it's because they never agreed on what the actual problem was in the first place. The thesis of my life's work. What I have seen over my career in technology is that the world is filled with wonderfully talented people who are dramatically underpaid and underappreciated. And it's because they misunderstand a core truth about work. How you talk about what you do matters far more than how good you are at the thing. And I really want to pause on this idea for a second because it's been the most important insight of my entire career. How you talk about what you do matters far more than how good you are at the thing. And I'm going to show you in the proposal exactly how to think about this, okay? I went from $75 an hour to $2,000 an hour, and then far further later, I'll share how I evolved all this into messaging strategy in a later video, not because I'm better at what I do, but because I changed the way that I talked about it. And I've seen hundreds of other people do the same. If you take nothing else from this video, take this. Owning your narrative in a modern workplace is the only way to have true freedom. All right, let's get into the proposal. All right, the first thing I want you to notice about this proposal is that it doesn't talk about me at all. Okay. It doesn't talk about how long I've been in business. It doesn't talk about what I'm going to do. It doesn't talk about how much I charge. What it focuses on is framing their reality back to them. It's not me persuading anyone. I'm not trying to convince anyone of anything. I'm confirming our shared understanding. And by the way, whether you're pitching an internal proposal or you're doing this as a consultant, what you need to do as a point of process is you need to first agree on the problem. And that's what you can see here. Programs have been effective. Leadership sees an opportunity to improve and drive ROI. We talk about problems, and we talk about the scope of the scale, and we talk about what the opportunities are. By the time someone sees their own business described more clearly than they've been able to describe it themselves, the problems they're experiencing, the hardest part of the decision is already over. Think of this like a doctor. You don't go to a doctor to tell them what drugs you want. You go to them and you describe symptoms, and you want them to be able to articulate what the problem likely is. That is what an effective agreement looks like. It's a clear understanding of the problem that you're experiencing. So the question that I want you to ask yourself as you're watching this, can the people who you are pitching at whatever it is you're trying to pitch feel themselves in your content, in your proposals, in your communication? Because when you explain what you do, does the other person feel understood, or do they feel like they're being sold to? And an important point here before I move on is that none of this happens by accident. This section, the reason I'm able to talk about all these links is because of discovery. So for those unfamiliar, discovery is a sales process where we work to uncover customer needs. And what happens is early in your career, you need to become a master of discovery because it acts as a bridge, right? You have to spend some time upfront to get to know your potential clients or your boss or whomever so you can be effective at framing their problems back to them. What happened in my career, and what can happen with you as well if you do this, is that over time, when you publish in public, your point of view becomes clear enough that discovery becomes optional. People see themselves in your framing. So what I did later in narrative and messaging strategy is I built a brand around this. People came inbound to me and I was able to charge $20, $50, $80,000 in engagement. I'll show you that proposal in another video, because people heard my point of view enough times externally that I no longer needed to ask questions. They came to me and asked questions like, when can you start? Are you accepting new clients? They were already sold. The money became secondary. I haven't had to pitch in years because of this. And this is what you ultimately want. In a modern environment, what you want is, you don't want to be a commodity, right? You don't want to be another copywriter. You want to be a market of one. It starts by understanding customer needs, and you want more people coming into you than you can possibly fulfill, because when demand is higher than your ability to supply it, it's basic economics. You charge what you want. All right, next section. The next thing that we do once we've aligned on the situation we're facing, what our goals are within it, and how we're going to measure our success. And I'll talk more about, there's been this big narrative in the internet world lately about, guaranteed, done for you, whatever. You will see no guarantees in my proposal, because no reasonable executive is going to buy guarantees. The world is too complicated for that. But once we describe these things, then we get to the process. As we walk through the process, what you see here is I am not talking about how many emails I'm going to write. I am not talking about what we are going to, how many word density, whatever, right? There's no volume metric here. I am communicating a process to solve their problem. They need more uh, personalized lead generation. Okay. And this is the effective process we're going to use to solve that problem. You can see here again, little formatting errors. Nobody gives a shit. Okay. What they care about is, can they see themselves in your proposal? I cannot tell you how rare this kind of thinking is. When the problem is framed correctly, okay, and you propose a solution that makes sense, investment becomes obvious, because you've clearly defined the scope and size of the engagement. You have clearly shown that you understand the way to solve this problem, the right process. We talk about in the freelance formula, process expertise versus subject matter expertise. It is much better to understand the right process to solve a problem rather than to pretend you have the answer, because the right people used to ask me, how are you going to know, do you know my business? How are you going to know the right words to describe our business? And I would say, I don't know the right words to describe your business. I know the right process I know the right process so that your customers tell me the words we should use to describe your business. Nobody ever asked any questions after that. This way of thinking and this way of articulating value is the difference between $25 an hour and $2,000 an hour. It is this simple. People who are probably better writers than me are making a fraction of the amount because they don't understand how to effectively articulate value. So you can see here, and then and only then do we get to what it costs. Now, the way I do engagements is I give good, better, best options, or used to do this in this way. I can go more into detail about that strategy later. By the way, if anybody wants to discover like a deeper dive on discovery questions, and what that should look like in another video, let me know. I can make that video in the future. But then and only then do we get to cost. And what you can see here is that I frame value in terms of expected return, not in terms of any guarantee. Because what people want to know is that you're the best person to try to solve their particular problem. No reasonable executive is looking for guarantees. You can see then I give them payment terms and I have a basic agreements and so forth. Why this has been so effective. What I'm trying to communicate here is not a proposal trick. It's an understanding of how every meaningful agreement gets made at work, in business, in leadership, in relationships. You cannot move someone forward until you prove you understand where they already are. And then what happened with me is eventually I stopped needing to do all this discovery. And it's not because understanding people's business context stopped mattering, but it's because my point of view was already public. And people agreed with how I framed the problem before we ever spoke. And this is what a strong narrative does, right? It creates the first two agreements, but it's scale and asynchronous of your effort. And that's when you start to get this demand that exceeds your supply, because understanding people's real problems and then having credible solutions is incredibly rare. This only works once you change how you see your own work. You cannot sell the true value that you create until you understand it yourself. How you talk about what you do matters far more than how good you are at it. And the better you get at framing your work, the more clearly you understand the impact that you actually create, then your craft will actually level up along the way as well. If you want help positioning your work at this level, my positioning sprint is currently on a waitlist. There's a link below if you want to learn more and apply. In a future video, I'll break down the proposal I use in my messaging strategy business today, the one that more than doubled my effective rate again, and I'll see you in the next one.